The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky here, and today I'm with Joshua Schultz. Joshua, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So yeah, Josh, you've built and sold, I think it might be 3 or 4 businesses, right, at this point. And you also are involved with software and automation, really optimizing and scaling businesses is your area of expertise. You spent about 12 years, kind of the global operations and experience around supply chain, building a business with your dad. But you really have, I think, very interesting experience and insights around kind of process design, decision-making, systems analysis, strategic sourcing, and a lot of other areas. You've shifted into consulting as well as some other projects. You're also an adjunct professor at Syracuse University. So where I want to kind of start off today's discussion is to take us back to the early days of your career, because I know that you built this business with your father that you later sold. That actually took you across the US border right into Mexico, but also overseas into Asia. Before you got involved in that business with your dad, were you doing did you have another kind of quote unquote real job, or was that the main job that you got into after education?
Yeah, no. So I have about 5 years in finance. I was really into asset management. I did a little bit of trading for a small hedge fund down in New York City. I did some stuff in Rochester, moved back home for me, which is Syracuse, New York. Did some asset management stuff there. Really loved the math. I love the trading. I love the feedback. I love being able to see if your decisions were right and then modifying. Started to develop a bunch of what you might call econometric systems for trying to slightly automate, but help us make more objective decisions about weighting. And from that, got into writing kind of a newsletter with a guy who ran the derivatives desk at Jefferies. And so that's all kind of what I was doing up to getting my grad degree. And then coming out of my grad degree, totally different.
And why? What happened in your mind? Why the shift from that world of asset management derivatives into a supply chain related business, right? In a complete, they're very, very different businesses. What was the pull for you to leave what sounded like something that you were enjoying into a completely different field?
Yeah, absolutely enjoyed it. Was obsessed with it. Still really enjoy reading about it. For me, it was looking at reality. So I mentor a lot of students through Syracuse University and just upstate New York founders. And one of the things I tell them a lot is, hey, if you try to be successful on somebody else's terms, you're going to fail. And that's what I was trying to do. I didn't have the network in New York. I didn't have the wealth. I didn't have any of the things that the people that were kind of making those strides that I wanted to be like had. But yet I was trying to kind of be them. And I think I finally just came to terms with that when I was getting my grad degree, that I didn't have the connections, the wealth. I just was always going to be working 10 times harder against people that were very well connected, 10 times smarter. And on the flip side, the kind of, I believe everybody has a unique step up in this life and we just miss it. Mine was my dad owned a very small fastener business. So when I finally, my whole life, that was what I didn't want to do. That was lame. It was boring, but that was kind of my unique advantage in this world. So when I finally embraced that coming out, he said, hey, just come work with me for a summer. You won't be bored. We got a bunch of stuff we're working on. And went there for the summer between years. And I absolutely loved it. I just fell in love with all the problems, the issues, and also said, you know what? I can apply the same amount of energy here that I have been in finance. And I'll probably go 10x further during my working career. Stacked on that, I was looking at VC. VC was starting to get into niche industries. They had not had supply chain yet. It's 2007-ish. So I knew that tech was going to be rolling down supply chain soon, and that was going to be interesting. And on the flip side, we were just kind of going into and coming out of the crisis, the financial crisis. So I also knew that I was going to be fighting kind of a consolidation where, finance is 24% of GDP. So I was going to be fighting that consolidation of employment my entire working career, not something I wanted to do. All that lined up. I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to make a shift here that I think will be better for the next 40 years.
So it sounds like you kind of really went through a process very consciously around trying to identify your strengths, your weaknesses. Where did you have an advantage and where might you be kind of facing an uphill battle on an ongoing basis? And that led to the decision, or at least had a big influence on it for the students that you work with at the university or those that you do kind of, mentor, give guidance to, is there any process that you found that can be helpful for somebody who's listening and watching right now who goes, yeah, how do I identify my strengths, my weaknesses? Anything you could offer around that?
So I was lucky. I ended up in China, which for me only meant I didn't have a cell phone for a month. I had the book, The Alchemist, and I was not speaking to anybody in English and barely understood Mandarin. So that forced me to do a lot more reflecting than I probably ever would have if I had been in the States for that month. But what I did, what I share, and what I believe is good is go for a morning walk every morning for 20, 30 minutes if you can, 15 if you can't. But all you're looking for is, what do I have that no one else has? Don't worry about what it looks like. Don't worry about if it's the ideal thing. What you find is once you step into a lot of those, you can shift them to be what you want. So I started selling fasteners. I ended up writing a supply chain ERP. Software is what I always enjoyed. So you can take it and kind of mash it into what you want it to do. Just look for what you have access to. And that's the real thing, like access. What can you access that no one else can? And I could access a couple of large customers. I could access a warehouse, could access my dad. So I accessed it and the whole world opened up.
Yeah, I think part of what you said there early on about just being in a very different environment with a great book like The Alchemist is a great way to, I think, to start, right? To get some inspiration or self-reflection. I remember reading that book many years ago and would highly recommend it for anyone that hasn't read it. So let's now kind of get into the business. So you started working with your dad. It's this kind of supply chain, fastener related business, very different from what you were doing before. You mentioned you encountered a lot of different challenges. What kind of challenges, like when you think about the business side, what were some of the biggest challenges that you just remember as being like, wow, these are really, really big issues that maybe I'm not equipped for or that are just hard for us? What kind of stands out for you? What do you remember from those times?
So yeah, I have a word for it now. I didn't then. There were no systems. And again, this is like storybook fallacy. I'm looking back with what I know now. I grew up building Legos. I grew up with this idea that everything had a place and only one place. That's natural to me. And so for me, watching them work in this business, I was like, there's so many places they can make mistakes and transcribe wrong, and there's no set form. And like they have to kind of make this up every time that they do it. They have to decide what to write down. And the sheer amount of information was overwhelming, and no structure to put it in made it even worse. So for me, that was like the biggest first thing is like, what the hell is going on here? And how are we going to make sure that we are at least doing what we're supposed to be doing, let alone add to it, grow, all that stuff. So my first thing I did was create an ISO manual. And so ISO is basically ISO 9000. It's a common standard that a lot of companies use to kind of basically check your customer requirements, your quality, basically says what you'll do. And I did that, but then I also expanded it to a whole process manual, a whole asset list, operate all the assets. I basically wrote the manual on how to run this entire business from box crusher all the way to complex sales and negotiations, which allowed me to better understand what's happening and kind of launch the next 4 years of improvements that we worked on, and also kind of helped me learn a lot of terminology around the way that I thought and be able to use it better. So once I understood that I was viewing the world through systems mindset, I was able to read books on systems thinking and get those tools, which made a lot of sense to me, right? So I read Thinking in Systems and I read the Systems Bible, and on there it talks about systems and complexity, and then it talks about feedback loops. So then I basically said, oh, this is the lens that I naturally believe in, that I view the world through. Now I have this giant toolbox I didn't even know existed to fold back over on my world and make adjustments.
What would be one example that you think might resonate with a consultant where there was a problem, there was no system, you built a system around it, and the result you saw by then having that system? What would be something that, again, would probably resonate with a consultant listening right now?
Yeah. So consulting is huge because a lot of it's qualitative, right? It's conversational. If you want to scale a consulting business, this is my opinion, you cannot do everything that you're able to do. So I know how to do a lot of things, but you're all over the place and you don't scale. You end up doing a little bits of everything. Once you can figure out like the one thing, like this is the guy, I'm going to be the X guy, right? Once you have that, now you can actually standardize your initial onboarding conversations, your sales conversations. So I had, not at the beginning, but by the end, I had, this is the work I like doing. This is the work I'm good at. This is the work that brings in a high fee. That means I need to know these 20 things up front. Now your conversations go from, well, tell me about the business. These very kind of wishy-washy, you're just kind of trying to become their friend almost. To, hey, I'm going to ask you 20 questions. We're going to run through this and it's going to give me an idea. How many employees? Give me their breakdowns on if they're warehouse or front office. you have a reason you're asking these. It gives you confidence. It makes you look more professional to the potential customer. The close is much easier because it's like, wow, he came in, he knew what to ask, and we're already fired up. I mean, just creating just a questionnaire alone, I think solves my problem, their problem, and my future problems when I'm doing consulting.
Yeah, no, you're definitely speaking our language, and we're big believers in that. I think that's a very powerful example. Did you have any pushback? Like when you were working in your dad's company, you were a younger guy. You had obviously some ideas about introducing things that were not there before. Oftentimes when people hear the word systems, if they're a smaller business, they dismiss it. They go, well, yeah, no, systems and processes, like these are things for bigger companies. We don't need that. Whereas everyone's very accepting of this. Or did you have to really push it through and make it work?
Yeah, no, nobody was accepting. One of the great things about working with my dad, especially earlier on, was at the office, I was Josh and he was Dutch. And it just happened naturally. But best thing ever was name change, role change in there. It was literally like flicking a light switch. And we must just be able to compartmentalize. And that's what made it possible. So in there, he didn't trust me. Business, I had no business history. I was a finance numbers geek. His partner called me junior till the day, he retired out, which was endearing, but also a little bit of a slam. And he meant it in a funny kind of like, oh, junior's got to change here. What are we going to do now? And so there was always that fighting like, hey, this is the kid that used to come mow my lawn, right? It was a small business. They all worked there for 18 plus years, 30 by the time they got done. So me coming in was kind of like, oh, I know all the mistakes that this kid made, like in high school. Like, why are we going to listen to him? So there was definitely a series of small projects that had success that showed them like, hey, this actually makes it easier, to the point where I think it was about 4 years in where Kevin, one of the partners, started saying like, well, let's put Josh on it and he can figure this out and then just implement a change, which means they were no longer questioning the system, to the point where 6 years after I started, no major decision was made without me. Not because I asked, not because I needed it, but because I was a trusted source of decision-making and problem solving.
It sounds like what you're describing, Josh, was almost, in the consulting world, what we refer to as like a discovery offer, right? Kind of an initial project to demonstrate value. So rather than the client saying yes to, or having to say yes to a $50,000 or $150,000 or $1 million engagement, you start with something small that might be $5,000, $10,000, whatever it might be, but a much smaller piece, which allows you to demonstrate value, therefore kind of de-risking the larger decision they have to make. Is that kind of how you would think about it, or what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. So I'll bring it back to consulting here. Even for myself, the biggest trouble is not convincing people that you can do something, it's that you will. And most owners, whether it's the owner of the business that's hiring you, or whether it's just the owner of that department or that process that's going to hire you to do something, they actually want to let go. Like they want just somebody to handle this. The problem is, in their experience, nobody has been able to handle it. They've taken it on themselves. That's why they're even talking to you, because everybody below them or above them is either too busy or not able. Like it always ends up back on their lap. So now they're protective of saying, whoever I hand this off to, it's going to end up back on my lap. Bad enough when it happens to an employee, definitely not going to pay somebody to hand this back to me in a month. So I think when you're, selling yourself as a consultant, it's selling the idea that like, hey, I got this. When you hire me and you give this to me, like consider it done. We don't even have to talk about it. I know what I'm doing. I know what you need. I'm thinking along the same lines as you. And the best way to do that is, well, it's through every conversation, but a confident discovery where you pull out the info that they say, he gets it. He's asking the right questions. And then you come back and say, okay, he gets it. He's got 3 of the ideas I already had, plus he has 2 new ones. Sometimes consultants, when they're selling, you share the idea and they're like, oh yeah, I thought that too. And you're like, oh great, I'm not adding any value. What you don't understand is the fact that they thought that too means you're lining up with them. Like they don't want to do it. It's like, they're not people with tons of time that are just like, oh, if I can do it, I'm going to sit on a weekend and play with this. They're not hackers. They're not, young bucks just sitting around. They got stuff going on. And the fact that you lined up with them, every little piece is like more and more that they can back off until finally I think that they hire you and they say, hey, this person's got it. So yeah, I think that buy-in, that discovery, that whole small step of a small win, whether it's a $2,000 win or something, is a fantastic step to prove alignment and help them take their hands off the big one.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business
to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. So you mentioned that one of the biggest challenges the business had when you came in was they didn't have any systems. Therefore, putting systems into place created a lot of value, allowed the business to grow. Before you exited, right? I mean, the business did grow considerably over the years that you were a part of it. What would you say, again, looking back and looking at your experience now working with other companies as a consultant, where do you typically find the biggest opportunities for optimization and improvement? I mean, we talked about systems. Are there any other ones you typically just kind of see, or even back to your experience at that company, really made a big difference in terms of having a big impact on the revenue and the growth of the company?
Yeah, I think resource utilization is huge. How are we using our drivers, our delivery guys, our warehouse, our quality equipment, whatever it is that you have? Every business is using something. How are you utilizing it? And I think that the biggest thing is like when you're in the middle of it all the time, when you see, for example, let's say you're running a delivery company of some sort, and when you see your driver in your truck, you think historically over the last 10, 20, 30 years, that truck has done routes and it's always been by zip code. You know what? I'm just kind of making this up, but you see that and it's so hard to step out of that to say, hey, what if we did it by, and you create a new kind of paradigm by which the deliveries can happen? What if we did all deliveries on Monday and we did all picking on Friday kind of thing? That kind of thing will speed it up. And it's just, you're not acquiring new things. You're not creating a system. You're literally just changing the order of some operations so that can happen faster. In manufacturing, we call it SMED. It's basically realizing what's an external process and an internal process, doing external processes at a different time. So, for example, back to this delivery idea, if you are picking and then delivering, why not do all picks then all delivers? If you're doing consulting, why work on just one client at a time? Why not batch all of the similar activities when you're in a certain piece of software, whether it's Excel? Your mind is more focused that way. You can streamline. You can probably move through it faster. Again, you're not hiring anybody to help you, but by changing the order of when you're doing things, changing when you're doing software, when you're doing billing, you can handle probably double the clients just by changing the order of some things.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting example. And you're kind of you took me to where I was planning to go to in terms of the next follow-up question around this, because it sounds like what you're getting at, or at least what I took from this, that I want to make sure that everyone joining us right now can see as an opportunity, is when you're interacting with a client, rather than always bringing new ideas, like new ideas are great, right? You could propose a whole new initiative, but a new initiative oftentimes to a client might sound like a lot more risk. And what you're saying is, or at least the way I'm kind of interpreting this, Josh, is that a bigger opportunity might even be just to look at a prospective client and really look at what they're currently doing and find improvements within that. Less risk typically, right? Easier to make those changes, see results faster, and therefore you're able to really get a win for that client much sooner, which then increases the trust, right? Removes the risk and has them wanting to give you a lot more kind of responsibility, permission, autonomy to help them to grow or to achieve more results. Would you say that's correct, or anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I don't always bring probably majority don't bring new ideas. I just change some things. Basically, with my clients, what I try to do is help them step out of where they've been, because most of them are smart. Like, they're just so ground down in the day-to-day. They do not have the opportunity. So my job is kind of like jolt them, force them up for a minute and be like, hey, we could do it this way. And most of them are smart enough to see all this. And they're like, oh yeah, that would be great. They can figure it out. So yeah, I think a lot of a consultant's job isn't just to be like, I'm the innovative guy, but to just be like, hey, I'm going to help grab you. We're going to go for a 30,000 foot flight really quick. We're going to look down at your business. And then when you drop back down at the end of this call, you're going to have a much better idea of like, oh, I got to change this whole thing now. So Our job is just to help them get out of that, right?
And the other thing you mentioned as well is for the actual consultant in their own business, right? To look at, what are you currently doing? Where are you spending your time? How can you be more efficient with that? I think one of the examples, one of the things that we do a lot with our coaching clients is looking at ways to productize their service offerings, right? So if you are doing something many times over, rather than trying to customize every single project, if you can actually pull that out, extract that, turn that into a training, into a course, into a workshop, something that you can build a system around, right? That creates typically significantly higher profits, but also a lot more leverage in your business. So I think that's kind of what I'm taking from those examples that you just shared.
Yep, absolutely.
So you went off, you grew the business. You also took it into, or you had interactions overseas, right? As you mentioned, China, Taiwan, Mexico. What did you learn? Like if you were to give some advice to a consultant or a consulting firm owner that maybe wants to start doing business overseas, especially with what happened in the world in the last little while, people are starting to see that, actually, I don't have to necessarily meet my clients face to face. Like the world is potentially, the customer base could be all around the world. Any kind of principles or things, like I remember from my time in Japan, there's certainly some things that stand out to me, and I'm happy to share those as well. But for you, what did you learn? What would you advise somebody who's looking or considering, developing their business overseas?
Yeah, I'd love to hear yours at some point. But I think one of the biggest things that I learned was two big things. One, everyone's not America. And I learned that from not only business, just personal travel. I was looking up to study overseas. And I just realized like America is one of many views. It's not even the majority view. And two, everybody makes decisions differently. So a lot of times we only think like, why would anybody want this? Or why would anybody, like, this isn't big enough of a business or a consulting area to focus on. And then the more I travel, the more I realize like there are thousands of companies spending millions and millions, if not billions of dollars on this specific niche problem. Not inventory management. No, specifically buying fasteners, not only just buying fasteners, but focusing on buffer stock, just-in-time inventory, not only just-in-time inventory, just focusing on how it's delivered. I mean, you could just keep niching down and there's still millions and millions there that people are focusing on trying to solve. And so once you realize that, you stop trying to be everything. You start just focusing on one. And then all of a sudden you got all these people talking to you and you're like, where have you guys been? I've been trying to run this consulting business. Somebody would talk to me. Now I got to raise my prices up high enough so that people will leave me alone. Right. So I think just understanding like, hey, there's a lot of decisions being made. Some of them are being made by people that have way more money than you'll ever have. Some by people with less, some with businesses that are like way bigger than you can imagine running. And they're hitting problems that you don't run across day to day in your small business. So with understanding, go out and don't be afraid to stand for something, to be something, because that need's probably there and it's probably much bigger than you think it is.
Yeah, those are awesome. So two of mine would be, one is relationships. So when we took our business to Japan and I went there and opened up the branch office, the business was called Kanke culture. Kanke in Japanese means relationship. So we're all about like relationship culture. And I've shared this, probably some people have heard me tell this story before. But the way that I really started to make inroads into the Japanese market, ended up working with some very large organizations over there, is through the connections that I made. And there was one key person that I remember. I was in Toronto. I sent a bunch of emails. Two people responded. Actually, I met with both of them, but one, we just hit it off right away. And this guy, his name was Shinosuke, he opened like doors. And then when I was in Japan, I think a week later or later that week, he took me to another meeting. We were in Osaka. I remember at the top of this, it was one of the large construction companies that had a building, restaurant at the top or a bar. And we were sitting there. He introduced me to another person. That person just opened doors. And so I just remember it's like for anyone, sometimes you think that you have to do all the work yourself. But if you can connect yourself, I know you had a similar story too, Josh, right? Where there's someone I think in China or was it Taiwan who like took you around. And that one person, I'm guessing, also opened up so many doors, taught you so much about the culture and the language and how things are done. Well, I had a couple of people that were so key. And without them, there's no way that we would have seen the kind of success that we saw there. So I would just say to anyone, always look for somebody who's at that next level or somebody who can open those doors for you and really try and build a relationship with them. When I was meeting with these guys, I wasn't trying to sell. I was trying to learn. And so just a second kind of principle that I have around this is listening. One of the ways that I learned Japanese, one of the ways that I think led to the success that we had was I wasn't trying to talk all the time, like very little. I would just sit quiet. We'd be in these small little, bars, smoke filled, people are drinking, laughing, having a good time. And I would just ask questions and then listen. And that way I'd learn and I'd be able to use that then when I'm making a proposal, right? Or when I'm suggesting something, because I've been taking in so much information, not just trying to say like, here's what we should do, or here's what we do in Canada or US or whatever. It was just very much absorbing. And then based on what I heard, kind of filtering that, analyzing it, and then making a suggestion or putting out an idea based on that. For me, that was a really kind of two really powerful principles that I learned over the years.
I totally agree. I would never be where I was if it wasn't for a lot of people, including Mr. Joe out in China, that just took time with me for whatever reason.
Yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit. You and your dad and the business, you guys decide to sell. Why did you decide to sell the business, first of all?
It's a mix of a lot of things. So he wanted to retire. I kind of wanted to buy it, but I kind of wanted to do something different. So there's a lot of pressure on that business, and it would actually be easier to restart it with a different focus than it would be to have changed the current business over. We could have risked too much customer loyalty. And so I think the best decision was we sell, we turn it into liquid assets. It frees him up. It frees me up to be able to do a couple of things that I want to do without having to worry about the cash burden, including restart some stuff. So I think it was just the easiest way to get to the next point in my life was to actually sell and then redo some things.
Were there any kind of sticking points or anything that looking back, you wish you would have done differently in terms of partnership agreements or the way things are structured? Like, would you learn anything through that, the process of selling the business that you think would be a best practice you would definitely want to use or apply going forward?
That's a great question. I can't think of anything. I mean, we got a really good valuation. We had a really good due diligence. Everything was really packetized and given to them because of the system work that we had done. We probably got lucky. Like, I'm friends with the people that bought it still. The whole due diligence was really well. I've heard some nightmare stories, and we didn't have any of that. We gave them what they needed. We ran it like a business. The numbers were all open. I can't think of anything I would really do differently. If a real problem would have been is if we didn't have kind of our systematized process manual, ISO manual, all the forms. Like, we had it ready to sell within a week just because of how we had structured everything. We also worked backwards. So I don't know if you remember, but we had actually known that we were going to sell. And so we had spent 2 years preparing for that. It's not just the systems, but also the financials, the cash flow, the tech that we were building, all that.
Was that life-changing money for you when you sold?
I would say life-changing, not like I'm not going to work again. But it was enough where I could sit and think for a second without worrying about the monthly bill. And I think nowadays the ability to think is life-changing, even if it's just for a few months, to just be like, okay, what am I going to do next?
Yeah.
Am I going to invest in something? Am I going to start something? Not many people get a chance, young enough like me, but old enough like me, you know what I mean? Where you're old enough to really know what you're thinking through, but young enough where you've got a couple of decades ahead of you still to run with that next thing.
And how did it change your life once you kind of got that cash windfall from selling the business? What actually changed for you?
I moved to Austin. So I don't even know if that was the cash. That was more, I wasn't tied to Syracuse anymore. So I moved down to Austin. My family's from San Diego, so they're used to warmer weather. So it was a chance to move south again. But I drive the same car. I read the same stuff. This is from Target. I mean, I'm not really doing anything very different, to be honest with you.
You know, when very often entrepreneurs, right, you know, we put things into the future. It's like, when I achieve this level of success or this level of income, or when I do this or sell this, then I'm going to do these things. Then I'm going to approach life a little bit differently. Is there anything looking back that, if you're really honest with yourself, you would think, well, yeah, I could have actually done more of those things that I was planning to do in the future at that time?
Oh, yeah. So again, I had that lucky time in China where I could think, and I actually realized that before. I had looked back at my last couple of finance years and realized all the things that I wanted to do when I got as successful as I wanted to be, I actually had access to at that time. I love going on the boat. I got 4 friends, including my parents, that have a great boat up on the Thousand Islands. I love going for walks. I love reading, and I love drinking coffee. I love jazz music, Sinatra, and I love bird sounds. All those are just random things, but those are all the things that make me smile. All pretty much free, all accessible wherever I go. And so what I realized was, I'm going to work so hard to buy a boat to go out in the water. I can actually do that now. What that did for me is it helped relax the Uber ambition, which I think can be dangerous, and allowed me to just chase curiosity. So I was lucky that I had that like aha in my mid-20s and not just now. So yeah, but looking back, I knew all that. So for example, I used to drive my friends crazy because I lived in Monterrey, Mexico. My apartment faced Sierra de Silla, which is kind of the big saddle mountain that you see when you look at the Monterey scape. It was literally out my back window, a little town, and I was right there. And so I went out every night and I said, this is amazing. Like, someday I'm not going to be in Mexico. I'm not going to be able to come smell the air, feel the humidity, and see this mountain. So I did it every night. I did it in China with Hangzhou, went next to Westlake, just knowing this isn't going to be forever. I've got a view right now that is to die for. And I go out there every morning because I might not be here someday, right? And so, yeah, I try to always embrace that.
Where does that perspective come from? Like, is that from reading certain books, having certain mentors or coaches, or study? I mean, I think it's a very powerful, like a very good perspective to have. So often people are just rushing through day to day, getting, their work done, building their business, but they don't necessarily appreciate or even give thought to that kind of at that level. How did you develop that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not natural. I was a real selfish person in my early 20s. I think it's a combination of hitting some really hard times in my 20s, losing a lot of friends because of how I was acting, losing all my money, going into massive debt, coming back on my hands and knees to live at home, just crawling, you know what I mean? It just, a lot of things went wrong. And after that time, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of journaling, a lot of reading and walking through other people's troubles that came out of it and wrote about it. I have a lot of biographies that I've gone through. And I think just a combination of self-reflection, learning from others, and then hitting some stuff myself made me realize like there's some more important things going on here. There's a whole humanity aspect to everything. And there's a beautiful world that's free. And that's the stuff everybody's trying to get to. And it's right outside my door. So, yeah.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. I think that'll certainly resonate with some people here. So you sold the business. You had some time to think. You've been an adjunct professor at Syracuse, and you've been coding. You've been building kind of some side projects. You've also been consulting. How did you get into consulting? I mean, did you just let people know, hey, I've sold the business, I'm now available? Did you do some marketing? Did people just find you? How did you start getting into that world of consulting?
Yeah, the truth is I've tried it a few times and I failed every time before. What was different this time is I had an audience. When COVID hit and I moved to Austin, I didn't know a lot of people. It's kind of bored, right? I was still working, but it just didn't take up as much time because I didn't own the business anymore.
Right.
So I have all these notes of small problems I had and possible solutions, just almost like journaling business style. And so I was going through them like, I wonder if there's any ideas here, little tools I can build. I had some software I wanted to learn and I was looking for something just to build to learn. And I started sharing them on Twitter, just really niche operational things that I didn't think anybody would care about. And lo and behold, some people did care. And all of a sudden, I got people asking me questions and it's like, man, this is great. I can talk about this stuff. I thought nobody else cared about ops, but these other nerds on Twitter. And so started doing that. And then when I finally stepped away from working for the company that acquired mine, so I stayed on for about a year, I was already getting 3 to 4 requests a week in my DMs. Can you help me with this? Can you help me with this? I was trying to do as many for free as possible, but if it took up too much time, I basically had to say, here's what I would do. Here's where I would look, try and go solve it. But some of them were like, I really would like you to come on. And so that was when basically I left and I kind of started just taking some of those on and fumbling big time with some of them. But yeah.
So I want to get to that in just a moment, but just to make it a little bit more tactical for everyone listening. So you went on Twitter. And why did you go on Twitter? Was that just a platform that you thought like resonated with you? Or did you feel that your audience would be on that platform? Like why not LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram?
Yes, I don't know. I've always liked Twitter. I hate writing. So that's ideal for me. It's literally capped. So I could write. I've tried blogging. I've tried newsletters. I have a newsletter. I write it about once a month and I enjoy it, but I enjoy the newsletter, the finished product. I hate the actual writing. But Twitter was something where I could be short, skip words, just leave punctuation off and it's accepted because of the character cap. So for me, that's why it was appealing. Like, even my threads, they're just like so I don't think in sentences. I think like in ideas and I can tell because whenever I write emails, I leave a lot of words out. When I go back and read, I'm like, what was I thinking? But I realize I'm writing how I think. Twitter allows you to do that without any judgment. Nobody even thinks anything when you do that. So it just fit my personality, I guess.
And how often were you posting on Twitter? Like, was it every day, every week, multiple times a day? Just kind of give us a sense of your output and frequency.
Yeah. If you want, I can share a quick Twitter 101 thing from my experience if you want it. Because I really think having an audience helps, right? Whether you're launching a product, a consulting business, thought leadership, whatever it is, I'm sure your whole audience is trying to build something. Having an audience makes it 10 times easier. And there's really some key things that you can do. One of them is, the first thing I did is I talked about a lot of things. I talked about a lot about supply chain. Nobody ever commented or liked it. I talked about coding. Nobody cared. I talked about Syracuse and some of the startup tech stuff. If you go back and look the last couple of years leading up to probably the summer of last year, to 2020, like you'll see all kinds of weird stuff. I was just testing. I was just playing. I mean, I had 400 followers, so nobody felt like I was making a fool of myself. And then when I started talking about ops, all of a sudden, man, this got liked a bunch and this got followed. I got 10 followers today. Wow, that's a huge increase, right? So throw a bunch of stuff out there. don't think you know what they want to hear. Like I still think my supply chain stuff is super helpful. Nobody cares. Every time I do it, it's like cricket. So the first thing is throw a bunch of stuff out there, see what gets the traction, use empirical evidence, not your ideas. Don't be subjective, not what you think is smart. The stuff that I think is the dumbest stuff people love, the stuff that I think is really insightful and will help, nobody cares about. So, and you see that across the board. If you talk to anybody on there, they'll say the same thing. So I think the only way to beat that is volume. You'll have to be pumping out a lot. Twitter makes that easy because it's easy to do volume. I mean, anybody can type in 2 sentences a day, right? You can do it while you're walking from the kitchen to the office. So Twitter makes that easy every day. So I have a matrix I created where it's got categories of topics and then types of posts. So there's threads, there's, ones where you're contrasting two ideas. So I can mix and match. And I can all start to measure like these threads with these topics get a lot, but these 2 topics don't get any. So I kind of systematized my content creation approach, include people that are well followed, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, tag them in it. Also try to follow keywords. So for me, it's ops, no code, SMB. And if somebody with a lot of followers, if you can be one of the first ones, people will start to see that you have an intelligent comment. They'll go follow you. And I have a list of these. I'd be happy to send them over and maybe you can put it together and distribute it out to your following. But anything that's worked, I've kept in a Roam notebook. And so I have this Twitter 101 thing. But it's really consistency, testing, iteration, and then kind of piggybacking on other people.
That's fantastic. Yeah, we'll definitely share that in the show notes. So I appreciate that. This has been really great. Before we wrap up, a couple of quick questions here for you. You talked about for reading books has had a big impact on you, studied many biographies. If you were just to kind of pick on maybe identify 2 books in the last that you've read or listened to, whatever, in the last 6 months that have had a big impact on you, what would they be?
I really enjoyed, what recently I read was Cokeland, and I really enjoyed that.
Say that again, what's it called?
Cokeland. It is about Charles Koch building Coke engines.
Yeah.
Really well done. It's got, when they talk about his merger and acquisition strategy and what he was looking for and not looking for, I found that really interesting. Could be applied small and large. It's very systems oriented. So yeah, I really enjoyed Cokeland. I'm trying to think. Good Strategy, Bad Strategy was pretty good. I enjoyed that. I'm reading AI, the AI First Company right now. And that is surprising. I thought it was going to be very high level, like, hey, you need to have AI in your company because you can predict things, like just some non-AI person writing it. It's actually some really great frameworks on implementing AI into your business, how to move from statistics to AI, the strategic benefits of it, a lot of specifics that I'm really enjoying and I've actually been applying in some of my consulting gigs to help them get up to speed. Not necessarily in AI, but just implementing data-backed services, companies, all that kind of stuff.
Is there one non-negotiable, like a positive daily habit?
So yeah, find somewhere beautiful. It changes depending on where I am, but I've got pretty set spaces. Right now, it's my back porch here. It was a small lake 2 blocks from my house in Syracuse. And I reflect. I find somewhere beautiful that is natural. And I just think about where I'm going, where I came from. It's not long. It could be as short as 5 minutes. It can be as long as 20. But just taking that check out of my day. I have 2 kids. It gets crazy. It gets nuts. I got business. I got calls. Just taking that time if everybody gets up to just check in with myself. Remember that I have way more than most people in this world, that I'm really well off, that I got food in the fridge. Just when you start your day, realizing that you have a ton, that you're set for the day, you got money in the bank account, all of a sudden you're like, all right, you know what? I'm way better off than I might feel when everybody's telling me I need to be afraid, I need to be worried, I need to hoard, I need to grab, I need to keep people away. Everything is really good, actually. Even when it's going bad, it's still really good compared to, you've traveled, you've seen some bad things, I'm sure. So, and then from there, everything is much easier with that state. That's kind of my non-negotiable.
That's awesome. It's a great way to wrap up here. Before you do though, Josh, I want to make sure that people can learn more about you. Where would you say is the best place for them to go?
Yeah, go to my Twitter. Feel free to DM me or call me out, whatever. If you don't agree, I love it. As long as you're respectful. So it's just Joshua M. Schultz. That's my handle. And I'm always looking to learn from people on there as well. There's a lot of really smart people on Twitter. So share with me what you're working on, what you're doing, how I can learn from you. And maybe the off chance I can help you, just let me know how.
Yeah, fantastic. We'll definitely have all that linked up in the show notes. A bit of a different episode here today, but I'm really glad to have you on, Josh, have you share your story. Some very powerful lessons here that I know people can implement and actually see an impact in their business. So thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. This was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.